and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duva, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who wears his Warcraft jammies to bed every night, sleeping alongside a Lothar body pillow.
Tim Longo.
Hey, buddy.
Oh, body pillow. What?
Yep. I know how much your wife likes that. You know, when you're traveling, it's good to have the Lothar body pillow still there.
It's favorite. Her favorite thing.
I'm sure it is, yeah. I'm sure it is. How you doing?
Good.
These are some longer missions we played this week.
Yeah. Oh, whew. I mean, I feel like the base destruction building, base destruction missions are just, they're kind of they're as long as you make them to some degree, but I tend to be such a methodical anal player of any RTS that they take me way longer than I think they should, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, since I've been tending to go fairly low-tech most of the time, I actually found this time I thought I'd give a try with the, I guess, the 9th human mission to go high-tech, to kind of build out the tech trees for the magic in particular. So I got the Rain of Fire or whatever, the big spell that the conjurers have, and then also the invisibility the clerics have. Yeah. And I thought that would be, it'd be interesting to try that. But I guess we'll get to that. I had hoped that would speed things along. I did not find that it did.
Yeah, I mean, there's another macro topic that I think it'd be a good timing to hit that I actually meant to bring up last time, but this so I'll plant the seed now and we can come back to it, but because I didn't actually build any conjurers, so I want to hear more about that because they were definitely used against me by the AI. But the micromanaging of, the spellcasting units or any unit that has multiple abilities has always been a frustration point for me in RTSs, and Blizzard has always leaned pretty heavily into that. Like Templars and StarCraft are kind of my ultimate example, because you really need to be good micromanager to use them effectively, and if you don't, that's kind of a blind spot in your arsenal. And so I've always feel like that's been a weak spot for me. But then that's sort of like the cornerstone of MOBAs moving forward, right? Where you have these hotkeys now that are standardized, and everyone has their own abilities, and it's a matter of learning those abilities. I guess the silver lining is you have one character to worry about, so it's much easier.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you even see a fair amount of that in WoW, in the sense that you bind your keys, right, to
that's
sort
fair.
of maximize, right? I mean,
yep.
But it's highly customizable, and it's very based on the build you want to do, and whatever makes whatever you're happy with. I don't know. Was that function keys or number keys? I can't remember which.
Number keys is the default usually, but you can move it around. I think the big difference though is that WoW and other MMOs tend to be target based. So it's your target you have, and generally you're not needing to, most of the classes don't have a lot of aiming or spatial management related, to that, other than AoE effects and stuff. But it's still target based. Well,
area of effect.
Yeah.
For those who are not.
Sorry, area of effect.
Those who aren't MMO nerds.
Yeah, you guys. But then, like with the Conjure, I noticed, and similar to the Templars and StarCraft, it is aiming based. You have to put, the Rain of Fire over certain sections, and you got to over certain tiles. Location based, and so you have to aim that, and you have to make sure that the enemy's standing where where they're still standing where you wanted them to, or you have to predict where they're walking to. It's just always frustrating to do that stuff.
Yeah, no argument. Did
you find that effective at all, or?
I would say no. I didn't actually finish that mission, or I didn't get to the Orc 9th mission either. So I'm the one who's a little bit behind this week with some extra workload, but I'm also trying to go on vacation next week, so a lot of balls in the air. But anyway, I mean, what I found myself doing was having to really closely manage any kind of caster. This included also the necromancers on the orc side, which raise dead. I liked the conjurers because they could summon scorpions, I guess. So I could just like summon a bunch of scorpions, and it's like free units. I mean, they just it's time. It takes time to be able to recharge them, but now they're just fodder that you can go and hopefully take out 1 or 2 units with. And I found it was more effective for me in the amount I've done playing these missions to actually not worry about their bigger abilities and instead have more conjurers and be able to conjure more scorpions. And with the invisibility, I mean, that's a really cool ability, but in practice...
Yeah, I did try that, yeah.
In practice, I find, like, I wanted to do the invisibility and the rain of fire together. I was like, that basically turns this into the ghost from StarCraft, right? It's now a character who has a nuke, and you can't see him, and they go and they nuke wherever. Mm-hmm. But that character's so weak,
as soon as they're seen,
they're going to be dead. They can't get away. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if the rain of fire depends on them staying alive, but I do know that they get off one rain of fire and then they're dead. And it's so it's a little frustrating from that standpoint. Like the amount of expense involved in being able to do those things is significant. It's like the research costs are thousands of gold, I think, and so you're
3,000 gold for the invisibility.
Yeah, that's what I thought, and like maybe 1,500 or something for the rain of fire. Yeah, so it's very expensive to invest in, and then you do have to kind of manage it. It does sort of turn these characters into those hero units that we've talked about, in the sense that those are the ones that we really care about now because they've got this big payload, right? But it takes time to recharge their mana. Like, I think it's balanced. I think the game is pretty heavily balanced against them. Because for the same amount of money, that's like 4,500, right? I could have 10 more archers. And I always max out the archer upgrades so that they're doing tons of damage.
Yeah, those are key, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, that's for me is the most effective. I mean, just purely from a management standpoint, like I talked about last time, I don't have to manage them. I park them somewhere, and I maybe put a couple footmen or grunts or whatever in front of them just to slow things down from getting to them. I don't really care if the grunts die. I just want them to be there as a small wall against something coming. So I don't know. I do feel like it definitely feels micromanagey, and it feels like the payoff isn't entirely there. If I were to start that level again, I would probably not invest in those things and instead just maybe create a couple more conjurers so that I have them and can make tons and tons of cannon fodder units.
Yeah.
Because they make anywhere from 1 to 4 at a time based on how much mana they have or something like that. So,
yeah, the micromanagement combined with the immature interface and usability that they have in this first game, right, where they haven't yet discovered and found and iterated on their interface and the controls that they have made so streamlined up to StarCraft 2 standards today. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, for instance, to give an example, with something like the Conjurer and the Scorpions, today there would be like a Zerg unit that you would actually be able to have that ability on essentially all the time in an automatic way if you wanted to, and you just click it on. And so it's persistent and it still drains mana, but then they just conjure automatically. You don't actually have to do that. And it's all based on resource management rather than the actual clicks. It's like, well, how much mana do they have? How many do you have, etc. And so they just balance against the usability of what because they want to make it easier for the player to use. So they balance against that. Right.
Right.
And so they just things like that, they just have automated a lot more of that stuff, which has been, that's why I think StarCraft 2 is so refined at this point.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a good direction to take it. I like the immediacy of doing the things, as a player, and of course, as kind of an old school player, I really enjoyed that immediacy. And I think that like what you're talking about takes the game kind of to a different level of abstraction to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, there's a lot of clicking in this game that is made unnecessary in later revisions of the series. With shift click to get all the same types on screen at once, or up to a certain number maybe, and then key binding armies and just like
key binding is huge. Double click, right? If you double click one unit, a type of unit, it'll select all of that type of unit on the screen.
Oh, okay, that's what I was thinking. Double clicking a unit, and then also shift drag, to get a group of whatever size. Like, there's a lot of things that come down to size management and things like that. This is a game entirely of micromanagement, and a lot of what I've tried to do in my style of play up till tonight has mostly been to kind of defeat the micromanagement aspect, and that's why I lean so heavily on the ranged units, because I just don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with, like, I'm going to hold this bridge. I'm just going to stick a ton of archers there, and like I said, a couple melee attackers, just so I can, I know they're not going to get past that, and I can build a larger army to go on a raid with later. So it is that, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I definitely fully had. I had not anticipated the. Obviously, from their perspective, they didn't maybe they did realize this, and we. It seems like we secured a guest for our last episode, so I'm excited that we'll be able to talk to somebody about this. I won't spoil it yet, but I wasn't able to appreciate the relationship between the usability and the interface and the micro, the clicking aspect of it, and the core game design, and how much those are. I mean, it's obvious to say it, like probably a no-duh kind of comment, but they're really so closely linked, and there's all the stuff that I take for granted in modern RTSs today, where, yeah, of course that's how it is, right? Like, why wouldn't it be that way? But when you take those things out, it actually really changes the intentions that they would have for the game. And it makes, like you said, micromanagement part of the point of the game, which isn't fun. Like, micromanagement almost is never fun if it gets in your way. Like, it needs to be kind of seamless. And
well, I mean, as a counterpoint, though, I will say, although I find it tedious to destroy the other bases, there is a period before all the units are gone that I really like, where it's like street-to-street fighting in a Total War kind of scenario, right? It's like I'm advancing through this base, and every time I unfog a little bit more of it, there are, more baddies that I've got to take out. So it is like, now that I'm actually invading, there's sort of a guerrilla aspect of them fighting back, and I really like smashing that down. I really like that. Like, oh, there's a couple more. Yeah. It feels like it feels like a war movie, or I can imagine like the sort of chaos of that. And often it's very chaotic. Like, oh, suddenly I'm getting attacked from two different directions just by two units. But as we've talked about, just a couple units makes a big difference in this game.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of like fighting through the city kind of feel that I do appreciate. What I don't appreciate is that once I've eliminated all those units, I want to just be done. Because at that point, I've got 6 or 8 or 10 units that are just kind of walking through the city. They're not coming back. I mean, as soon as I destroy something critical like a barracks or the town hall or whatever, I'd like it just to be done.
Well, I think they moved that in the future, right?
And that's the way StarCraft was, right? They moved to that where
you killed the main base and
the main base, the base. Although, of course, in StarCraft they also went kind of crazy and let you move the bases, as I recall. So.
For the Terrans, yeah.
Which was pretty awesome, when you were like, oh man, I can move the base.
And for any of the StarCraft players out there, I also just had forgotten how much of those sort of early ideas are really in here. Like the Rain of Fire that the the conjurers have, and how close that is to the Psi Storm, the Templars, like it's just all the little things, and how much do you use catapults? So are you using those at all?
I have used them a bit. Usually I'm not really very good with the catapults, to be honest.
They're kind of a cornerstone of my new strategy. They've become that, but
yeah, they haven't for me, and that's largely because I tend basically the enemy tends to throw melee units at me, and if they get through my sort of first couple of grunts or whatever, or even if they get caught up on them, I'll end up firing the catapult in there and killing my own dudes, right. And it ends up being very costly for me to use the catapult.
Right.
I basically look the catapult as I'm going to lose at least 2 guys every time I fire this thing.
It seems to be pretty good. I don't usually actually manually target things for them to take out. So I just wait. I just let it auto attack because its range is so far, and it seems to be pretty good at not firing at your own units unless you do something, unless you move into the line of fire. And because it's so, the formation I have, they're right behind my archers, and because they shoot so much farther, as anything is coming toward my archers, they usually get a couple shots off before they get into range for the archers. And so they'll take out those ground units, and then the archers just clean up afterwards. So, but it's really only effective on bottlenecks like the bridges and stuff, right?
Right.
Like you can't really use them. I haven't been able to use them effectively otherwise, because if any of the ground units get by, then they're toast, right? Because they can't defend themselves or whatever. But.
There was a level here. Oh, it's the one I called My Garona.
Yeah, right. I want to talk about her later, but keep going.
Orc level, yeah, when we get to the lore stuff.
My Garona. Are you kidding me?
Yep. I've got the knack, man.
Uh-huh. All right.
So, anyway, in that level, you have a couple spellcasters. It's a dungeon crawly level. You're in, I guess, North Shirabi, is that right?
Yes, right.
Yeah. And I ended up getting down to just 1 grunt and the 2 casters. That's all I had left.
Oh, shoot.
But as it turned out, I had killed everything else. I just didn't know, because there was a fair amount of the map that was not visible.
Mm-hmm.
But the units were kind of the human units were kind of coming down one at a time, rather than in larger groups.
Yeah,
and then at one point I triggered the elemental, and that was when I lost most of my guys. Because I've been kind of like dragging things back, kiting things back, letting the archers take him out, and then go out and get some more and kite him back, right? And just kind of this. It was a very slow process. But I felt pretty good about it until I got to this point where it's like, and now an elemental came in and just, wiped out pretty much everybody. And so I ended up having to go hunt through, and then I found her. And I was just like, oh, phew.
Lucky.
Yeah, I felt very lucky, because if there had been something back there, that was a lot worse, like the level before, What I liked about that level is that even though I was micromanaging a fair amount, it did start to split, so my attention was split, which gave it kind of this pressure, right? Because there's basically 2 paths.
Yeah, right.
Back to the back half, the top half of the dungeon, there's a path to the right, path to the left, and it kind of, because I was mostly just using units to draw, to aggro stuff and kite it back. Yeah, I was pretty focused on just 1 or 2 units that I was micromanaging, but then I was like having to bounce back and forth and move my archers back and forth. At some point I just got crushed, but and at that point I was like, oh man, I don't even know. Luckily I had to save a while before that. I was like, well, we'll see how this goes, and I got through. But I did like that. It was sort of a minimal micromanaging. That was the level that felt most like a tactical RPG.
Yeah.
You had an NPC, a named NPC, and you were in a location, that was very dungeon-like. it's kind of weird to be riding around with the raiders on dogs in there, but okay.
Yeah, you could see some of my notes I wrote down for that one. For that one and the Medivh level. The name of the level I didn't write down. It's escaping me here, but when you have to go take out Medivh, who's another character that I want to talk about later. But yeah, both of those levels, they definitely, I feel like I saw a little Diablo in there. They definitely were. I definitely applaud them. We talked about this in previous episodes of just the mission variety that they added into this compared to, say, Command and Conquer, which is cool because they have these dungeon missions that they continue to this day. But you could see their RPG influences, that they right. Probably love those, those RPGs. And it's like, how do we combine the two? And I don't know. There's some. I hope our guest can give us some insight into maybe any influences that the Warcraft games had on Diablo 1 as well. Because I, at least, not to get on a tangent, but I just remember when Diablo 1 came out, and it's the real time nature of it compared to, say, the Baldur's Gates or whatever out there. That were kind of more,
or even Fallout, the original Fallout,
right? Fallout, yeah. And then like Baldur's Gate being like this weird hybrid, where you still were kind of pausing, and there was still some. It was like there were some vestiges of that turn-based, combat from the Fallout days, but then Diablo just went all the way, right? And it was kind of like a bit of a weird, silly. Controversy around that of like, is this really an RPG, and what right. is an action? I just remember action RPG was like funny. Not a thing.
What's funny is it actually started out as a tactical turn-based game.
Diablo 1.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so
and what they did was they had added basically a cheat for testing, which was like to hit the space bar to basically skip ahead. And they were just playing it all the time. They're just jamming on it. They click and jam the space bar, click, jam the space bar. And so they ended up being like, I wonder if you just took that out altogether.
Right.
If you just did it all the time.
Right.
So it's funny. It definitely it was accidental. It was not, obviously it was designed to be another thing, but it's pretty wild.
Yeah, and it's funny. Well, and I guess another topic I wanted to maybe hit was, I guess a bit of a question. We've touched on it in previous episodes some, I guess, so maybe it's not a long topic, but just I don't think we've really talked about real-time strategy as a genre. We've talked about it in terms of the two kind of main games at the time, but what was your history with real-time and, well, I guess tactical and strategy games before RTSs were basically created by, these two companies? And I just remember turn-based games for me, strategy games, I always loved the idea of them as a player back then, both as a gamer and a developer. But they just always kind of bogged me down, and like I never stuck with them because I don't know, I wasn't patient enough or what it was. Because of the idea of just getting into the nuances of just all of the rock, paper, scissors going on. I always loved that idea, but I just never finished any of them. And so when RTSs, when this game came out, which was really the one that stuck to me more than the CNC or Dune games, it was sort of like a bit of a revelation for me because of the real-time aspects, despite the micromanaging of it. And it seemed like such an obvious thing, that should have happened before. But like, what do you remember when you had played this, originally, what the feeling was? And I don't remember if you'd played many turn-based games.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I would have played that would have been turn-based. I think what I probably played a bit was role-playing games that had tactical combat. So I'm thinking like the Ultimate games mostly are that. Mm-hmm. And they're in all in different sorts of forms. Some are, the first one's like first person when you're in the dungeons, and I don't remember if that's true the second one or not, but yeah, I guess it is. I guess the first couple of those are real time combat. Well, it's sort of timed. It'll time out. basically, but it's basically turn-based.
Yeah.
So it's turn-based with timing out, and it's pretty straightforward to keep on top of it. I think the original one, just in the first-person turn-based combat, is entirely turn-based, and those games didn't really bog me down, but combat was only a part of them. I mean, there was all these other things that were, arguably much more important, as fun as the combat was. And the other games, I would say, would be like the gold box games.
Yeah.
Which I think precede this.
Oh yeah, definitely. I got
right.
it.
I mean, those go back a ways into the late '80s, right, and into the early '90s. I mean, they're roughly contemporaneous, and those have a ton of tactical combat. There's way more even than in Ultima, I would say. And of course, you're managing a whole party, so they are actually not that far from this in terms of the micromanagement. It's just that you have all the time in the world to do it.
Right.
So, but I mean, I think the design pulls you a different direction there. If you're doing turn-based battles, that you want a little bit more. You want basically individual actions. You want more variety of them, and you want them to be more impactful. So every time your fighter swings his sword, he's gonna do half a creature's hit points and damage or whatever, and you've got a magic user who's got a half dozen spells, and you can maybe choose to have that fighter defend somebody else, or I mean you have these options, and it's all geared around making those individual decisions important. And here, it's very much about making those individual decisions not that important because you're making them constantly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
it's distilling down and simplifying. Yeah.
Right. So what it does is elevates you back up to that level of controlling areas of the map. I mean, it almost becomes chess with sort of like a real-time element, right? Of like, I'm trying to keep track of my strategy and my understanding of this map. I want to learn more about this map in a controlled way, as it turns out for this particular game. But so I want to find those choke points. Those are really, really important. I want to get to those and park a lot of archers there, or catapults or whatever, so I can hold that bridge so that I'm safe to build behind. And I think it really does focus on sort of the high level, the general's view of war, right? Instead of
that's what right.
The party level of war, which I guess is sort of similar to what we were talking about last time about the sort of the way RPGs evolved from wargaming. Here, you're kind of evolving back the other direction to a certain extent.
Well, yeah, and I have I have nostalgia for the gold box games, and those RPGs evolved with that tactical, more turn-based combat. Like I said, they kind of I wasn't always looking forward to the combat, and there was much more to do, so I would go through it. And I believe I have greater nostalgia for the Eye of the Beholder games in that era anyway, the more grid-based first-person stuff,
right,
instead of the party-based stuff. And it's interesting as you were kind of talking through that stuff there, like I feel like those tactical moments in combat were almost like there were a bunch of micro decisions rather than micromanagement. Like each character had multiple abilities and things that they could do against the rock, paper, scissors of the enemies, and so you were given all the time in the world to actually decide how you wanted to go about, what you wanted to do during the combat. And here, you don't have all the time in the world, and so it's not necessarily about those micro decisions in each individual unit. It's more of managing like you said, the army. And so I don't know. It's interesting, like the micromanagement versus decision making it just flipped on its head. And I have this kind of vague memory when I played this game originally of just a bit of like the shackles coming off of like, of course, now I can, I'm not like, they've given me just though I'm definitely frustrated at times with this game, and I don't remember that part back then. But they've given me just enough to worry about, but I always have control, and things are always real time, and I just really loved. I think that's why I fell in love with the genre at the time.
Right. Well, and you're managing investment, to a certain degree, right? I mean, I think probably my biggest trouble with the ninth human level is not so much that I'm exploring these other unit types. I think that's actually fine. I think the problem is that I've upgraded, all the other weapons all the way. So I basically spent a huge amount of capital, on all these different investments, and I'm not really making each of them pay off.
Yeah.
Right? So, great, my grunts have the best shields and swords. However, I'm only ever got one or two of them out there, and I've got invisibility, but, I've only got one cleric casting it, so, it's not like I can cast invisibility on a large force, right. Or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So, I think there's also that. There's also the sort of, which is kind of related to sort of army composition management, like what do I want to have, and that might change over time. Like I tend to bring in catapults just to speed base destruction along later on because they do a ton of damage to buildings. So I'll bring them and kind of park them and let them fire off at other corners of the map while I take out closer buildings. That composition thing sort of reminds me of playing like a deck building game, something like Dominion, where you're building this deck on the fly, and the composition of that deck is changing, and you're keeping in mind, okay, well, now I have a lot of these victory point cards that don't do me any benefit, when I play. They only count at the end. It's clogging my deck. I mean, what do I want to do about that? Or I have too much money, or I have too little money, right? I mean, you have this... You always have that sort of balance that you're worrying about, and I find that to be essentially how combat evolves over the course of, over the course of a mission or whatever level.
Yeah, well, and just the something to pull out something that you said there too, just the reactive nature of it versus the turn-based combat in other games. Like I both love and hate that because the tides can turn in some specific way or moment of something happening, and you kind of have to scramble and kind of, based on what composition you thought was a good idea, and then one of those units that was a cornerstone of your plan gets taken out, and then you have to react, and
right.
And though
it can be that, and it can be literally like, so I had a save in the 7th human level, or maybe the 7th orc level, and I had a catapult that was rolling out when I saved, and if I didn't stop it, so I got wiped out at that point, lost a huge amount of army, and it was all because of that catapult. Right. And it was just, I had sent it on, I was moving it up, I was micromanaging, but I hadn't sent enough forward units ahead first, and I just kind of like got the catapult going. I don't remember what happened to distract me, but so whenever when I reloaded, I had to stop that catapult, and if I did that, I could just mow through the people who were coming, right. The units that were coming, and it was literally that one unit that made a huge difference, because then it wasn't there to guard the bridge that I was basically taking after that. So yeah, I mean, it can just like, one momentary decision. There's a moment like, well, okay, I'm committed. Yeah. Win, lose, or draw, which can be exciting, but it also, like you said, it can be totally frustrating because it's like, oh, I didn't think that was gonna. Yeah,
it's. I mean, it's like
it'd be hard to predict, right? I mean,
I feel like that's kind of the theme of the, a lot of this era where games that weren't typically real time became real time. It's just they're higher highs and lower lows. With the turn based anything, like you have that methodical, more thinking person's way and approach of each step. And you still will make a mistake or something, but there's still that chance to recover because you can take a breather. Here it's like you can be totally, it can be over because of that one, luckily you had a save, but because of that one choice. But if you are able to recover, or if you get the upper hand and you just kind of everything goes your way, that high is so much higher because you just feel like the ultimate commander. And I just love it for that reason. Even though there are multiple times when the game still kind of this era of the game design just fights you, and they just weren't there yet. It's really interesting. It's always, obviously, for this whole podcast, I think we're constantly reflecting on, modern day versus our memory of what it was like back then, because, I know better now because of StarCraft 2.
Right. Well, and other games. I mean, everything is kind of moves in that direction. It's all everyone learns from each other. Yeah. Yep. That's definitely that's true of any creative field for sure. But in games, it seems because we're in it so much. But it's no different. I mean, if you're a writer, you read books and you see a trick and you go, "Oh, I'm totally going to use that someday," in a different context, or, "Oh, I love that turn of phrase, I'm going to tuck that in my notebook," or whatever. Yeah. It's the same thing. And filmmakers is the same way. So. Yeah, and it totally is. And, Jen, my wife's a writer too, and, we talk about this a lot as well. I think the one thing that I always am so honored and proud and excited to be making games, though, is that we are, compared to a lot of the industries, we're still so young. We still do not know what the heck we're doing. You know what I mean? Like, so much of the time, or we're inventing things from scratch. This game is a good example, right? Like, before that, people were like, real-time strategy, any type of, strategy is all about turn-based. There's no way you could do real-time, and I just love that every year something like that, it feels like every year something like that is discovered and somebody puts 2 and 2 together and gets, a different answer. And I don't know, it's just exciting. Not that doesn't happen in other mediums, of course it does, but I just feel like we're, I'm not taking credit for any of this because, everyone's throughout the industry is doing it, but there's trailblazing happening all the time. Right. I mean, and, another game from them here, Diablo was really lauded at the time for its procedurality, right? Which was, basically kind of Legos, with a little bit of other stuff, but it was mostly like, we're going to stick together these pieces that we know fit. We're going to make a lot of those pieces, and maybe a little bit of pathing to make sure you could actually get there or whatever. And then you take that sort of like level of procedurality, which was already building on like NetHack or whatever, or Rogue, because of course that's where roguelikes comes from. And now we're on the cusp, in the next week of having No Man's Sky, which is going to be this immensely procedural, like, whole universe of procedurality. And it's just like, you can push on any individual thing that we do and just push it, to all kinds of directions that we're still finding. I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. I did want to comment on the level variety. I mean, even though I didn't get to all 6, I did feel like I saw a bunch of different sorts of things here. And I really liked that. There's a mission where you basically go to retrieve your workforce. I like that a lot. Where they split the base destruction up into 2 phases, Oh, no, that's 9. I'm talking about the first one where you have 6 peons that are imprisoned. Oh, yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. So you have to go get the peons out. I got very lucky there. I actually went the right way and found them and found the wall where they're enclosed. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen when I go through this wall. And so there's that. Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, I like that one a lot. And that might be my favorite, actually, just because of that. If I had a harder time finding it, I probably would have hated it. But as it happened, I found it. I find the first, related to that really quick, the first thing I'm doing now, once I make my first save, is I just scout the map and basically waste time in a unit just to figure out where everything is, and then I reload. Right. Just so I see where the bridges and the bottlenecks are, and that's how I found that thing. And then I just reloaded and then walked over there. I've done that too, mostly because I guess one map, and I don't remember which one it was, but I found a mine. I'm like, okay, wow, that's kind of a far way. And I was like, plumbing this mine. It turns out there was one much closer. It was in the opposite direction. I just didn't find it. So when I did find it, I restarted that mission. And then in 8, Human 8, you have this dungeon crawl to get this one guy, Medivh. I didn't love it because you actually have to kill everything. Like, so it's like, well, the mission's that, like, I'm this commander and none of these units have names. Like, they obviously don't matter, like, as much as getting Medivh. I don't really care if they get out again. But, so that part of it was frustrating, but I really did like the setup. That was a good hook of, like, there's this one dude in there and you got to get him.
Yeah.
And that was well,
cool. And not only that, like, so to speak about that mission for a little bit, on my side, just the dungeon crawly aspect. It was the most dungeon crawly of the dungeon missions. I felt like, where you're systematically going through, and there wasn't really too many dead ends, right? There were a couple, but you just get this sense of, again, I talked about this last time too, but this sense of like a WoW dungeon where you're just pushing through, right? And you're pulling, and there's a variety of mobs in there, which, by the way, the concept of creeps and mobs that are carried forward today in MOBAs and in MMOs, right? You just see a little bit of that in here, which, those are from RPGs anyway. But then you kind of build up to his the rooms where he is, I forget what they call that structure, but, and then there's a free, and they mention in the intro that he's like summoning demons and helping the orcs, which I'll talk about after the break. And then there's a friggin' demon comes out, right? And it's a surprise, and probably the only time they use the demon in the whole game, I think. And then Medivh's a unique character, and he's a total badass. And he and the demon took out a lot of my guys. I was down to the wire. It was this little nice bit of tension and drama that was pretty cool.
Yeah, he wiped me at least once. Maybe twice. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah,
I got lucky, but yeah.
Yeah, I ended up... it was weird because I guess the first time, he didn't come out of his room. I sent in a guy to taunt him. I sent in a raider or whatever, a knight, whatever it was, a knight, I guess. And I had my archers all lined up behind the wall. I'm like, I'm all set, because you can fire through walls, which is, okay, good, I'll use that. And he didn't come out. And the first and second demons came out, and they wiped out pretty much all my party. And then I couldn't get close enough to Medivh because he has a very long range attack, and I couldn't get close enough to actually kill him because he can also fire through walls. So you can't really cheat him. You have to give him a more tantalizing target. I finally did take him out by basically giving him a tantalizing target and constantly healing it. While my archers took him out. So I
pulled him all the way out of the building, and
really?
Yeah, like I had set up a whole formation wall way back there, and I just would take my my knight in and run and pull him out, and just enough to trigger him. And I'm not sure how I survived all the way getting all the way back, but it was enough time, I guess, for the... I guess so there were 2 demons. Maybe I didn't notice that, so... Yeah,
there were 2, and you have to kill them both, so...
Yeah, I must have then, yeah.
Yeah, you must have. Why don't we just keep rolling and go straight into the lore and make this a short one? I know that's your other macro topic for the evening.
Yeah, we can do that. Sans break. And I talked about last time that I wanted to, last episode, that I was going to go deep into this. And I, doing a little research and kind of, after playing these missions, realized, I'm probably not everyone listening. Everyone listening is as big a geek with this stuff as I am. So I no need to go into the super deep stuff, for sure. So, but I do want to mention some specific things, and then one macro topic that I at least thought was interesting. And I think Brett would have some things to say about as well, because in my career I've worked exclusively with established IPs, and some well-known IPs where there's a lot of lore, canon, fiction, what have you, that is already established. And for me as a Warcraft geek playing especially this set of missions, in one mission you save. We already talked about Lothar previously, and Lothar being in the Warcraft movie that just is out. Ironically, he is a big figure in the lore, but maybe not even as big as the two that we meet in these missions. Garona, who is sort of a master assassin, half orc, half Draenei, for those who are super geeky about this stuff. So she has a weird history, but she's actually and she's also in the film, by the way. She has a core, pretty important role across the franchise, and they actually mention it in the beginning of the would be 10th episode, where she's actually the assassin that kills the king in this game we're playing now. And so she becomes this kind of legendary figure, and you meet her in WoW occasionally as well. So she's actually a really important character. And then Medivh, who is probably
Can you clue me in on where she was in World of Warcraft? Because I don't.
So she is. You probably haven't met her. She is in some of the newer expansions.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Warlords of Draenor.
The
newest one. I think
definitely didn't get that far.
Let me look here. She also was in Burning Crusade in Nagrand. I believe she was a blade master working for one of those. She's in the comic. She's all over the place. And she was kind of has some connections to Gul'dan, who's one of the big figures in Warcraft 2, and is the big bad in the Warlords of Draenor and Legion, the new expansion coming out. Because he's the orc that summons the warlock orc that summons the demons and stuff. But I digress. Anyway, for me, it's just so funny to see. The macro topic here is, and I talked a little bit about last time, but once you've established figures like this, where, we're playing this modest RTS with this fairly light, they just have these intros in the beginning of the missions that describe the lore. So it's very light. There's really not much to it.
Right.
But they've created these characters that they stick throughout time. And we deal with this a lot on the games I'm working on now, where there's all this canon that has been built up over time that you have to figure out how to respect and how to not break it, and how to always bend it to make sense and make sure that, everything's working correctly. And, Star Wars was the ultimate example of this, of how do you create a new thing? And we can use Republic Commando as an example, or Starfighter games, that lives within this world where there's all this stuff surrounding it that you have to abide by. I don't know, how much you guys ran into this, of course, with the Elder Scrolls game, which is a similar kind of situation where there's all these rules that sometimes you are shackled by, right? You really wish they were not that. And there is some retconning that Blizzard had to do with Medivh specifically, which I'll talk about in a second, but of course, because we kill him in this mission. But and just that notion of being, again, shackled to these early ideas that probably, and hopefully when we get our guest on we can talk about, were just whimsical, quick, probably not very well thought through ideas of we'll have this mad mage who we have to kill in this dungeon. We'll call him Medivh, and and then the next game comes out, and I don't think Medivh's in the second one, but then they bring him back, and it's just this funny concept of these things that you don't realize you're signing yourself up for
right.
early in a franchise that end up becoming sometimes the cornerstone of your franchise,
Right. I mean, you look at, Star Wars is a great example. You look at Boba or Jango Fett.
Boba Fett's a great example, yeah.
Right. I mean, as this character who, for whatever reason, audiences, especially kids, really loved.
Yeah.
Totally resonated. Enough that he became, Boba, had met his end sort of met his end in Empire. Or rather Jedi. And then, they basically bring the character back in these prequels, right?
Yeah.
So there's
ham-fisted.
Yeah, exactly. Squeezing that in. It's like the warehouse scene in the Crystal Skull in Indiana Jones movie. It's like we've wedged in this thing that doesn't really fit, but we're just going to go ahead and shove it in for fan service anyway, right? You know, and make him a huge cornerstone of the whole universe in the case of Jango, because all the clones come from him. And yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's like, well, we're going to respond to what people responded to, and we're going to try to fix that. I mean, Hayden Blackman, who was the Star Wars content supervisor, something like that. I don't remember his actual title.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it was something along those lines. And then later, I guess Ryan Kaufman did that job. But I mean, we would call Hayden while we were working on Starfighter and ask him all kinds of stupid questions, mostly just to piss him off. And we would call and ask about, well, what, you know, if you had a lightsaber and you put it up to your head and you turned it on, you know, what would happen? You know, and he'd have a perfectly well reasoned, you know, explanation of, well, there are no actual safety features on a, you know, and he'd just go blah blah blah. I mean, and then at the end of the conversation, he'd say, "I hate Star Wars," and he'd hang up. And because he knew all that stuff, because he wrote the Insider's Guide. Yeah. He did all the writing for that. So he had to read everything.
Yeah.
You know, one way to approach that is to just trash it all. I mean, that's what basically Disney has done, right? Has said, hey, all that expanded universe stuff, that's gone. We have 6 movies. That's the only stuff that actually matters. Anything else is just something else. Yeah. You know, it's a different thing. And to a degree, that's what they do with Elder Scrolls, right? They have this thing called a dragon break.
Oh, what is this? I don't know about that.
This is basically a split in the timeline or something like that.
Shut up.
No, it's a real thing. I only know this because I wrote a crash tracker for Bethesda, just like, you know, to catch the internal crashes while we were developing, so we could fix them. And I had it pop up a window so you could tell us what you were doing. You know, so it would go in with the bug. Hey, if you click on this thing, it crashes, whatever. And a designer actually sent me mail and asked me to change the title bar on that window to say "Dragon Break."
As an inside joke. As
an inside joke of like, you know, the editor crashed, Dragon Break. Yeah, so I mean,
the Dragon Break is? It's just a fully embraced time split or something.
Yeah, it's part of the lore that basically explains discrepancies.
Oh, so they've named their retconning.
Right, basically. Oh, yeah, basically. It's like, this is a point. Well, because you've got the outcome of any individual game might be different.
Got it, right.
Right? I mean, you might be a good Dragonborn, you might be a bad Dragonborn, or, you know, whatever. So you have to have some way of, you know, making that make sense, you know, for people who care about these things.
Right.
And so the way you do that is you say, well, you know, the Elder Scrolls are these prophecies, but there are these points in the timeline that are these dragon breaks, which are, you know, is what they call them. I only know that because of this tool. I never would have known that otherwise. But yeah, so that's another way you can go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, because I, as both as a developer and as a fan of many things, I love it. Right, I love that commitment that a company or that a creator will have to that stuff, and working with the franchises I have, you know, I definitely tend to be a champion of that stuff, and you can definitely overdo it sometimes. And I like to try to, maybe it's just kind of the puzzle part of my brain, I like to try to figure out a way to make it all work, you know, even if there's some things that might contradict each other. And that can get you into trouble, of course, but well, and I like, I mean, there's a couple things I like as well. I like zooming in on one small part. Mm-hmm. And that's basically what we did with Republic Commandos. We really just zoomed in on focused
on this one thing that was kind of under focused on. You know, to a degree, that's what Tomb Raider did. Mm-hmm. You know, the reboot was to focus in on that one time of her life instead of, now she's already this established person. Let's zoom in. I mean, you're rebooting, so why not?
Well, and that was intentionally why I was pushing so hard to not globetrot in that game, because you know, typically Tomb Raider games like Indy, you know, she'd go from location all over the world, and so we decided to focus on just the one island, so we could, you know, go deep and not worry about like all these different, at least for the first reboot, not all these different, religions and stuff.
I would go out on a limb and say there's a real danger to overthinking your lore on your first game. I have worked on a game, and I won't name names. I didn't stay with the game long enough to ship it, and early on, before the thing was funded, there was a lot of effort put into the world. And I think that actually ends up hog-tying you, to a degree, because you end up generating all this stuff. There's some blogosphere friends of mine, game dev and game writing blogosphere friends of mine had a whole wiki that they created for an IP that's not a real IP. It's like it's meant to be for all these games and movies and stuff. And they just would dump in. It was like a creative writing project that like a dozen people contributed to, and they just kept glomming on more and more stuff, and like just it was essentially the biggest lore bomb ever, but had no delivery mechanism. There were no, but they did it for fun, right? I mean, to be kind of reflective of that kind of, because it's exciting, right? It's fun to do that sort of thing. I think it was called Suparna, Suparna, Suparna Galaxy or something like that. And there's just tons and tons of lore. It's all lore. I mean, the whole thing is lore. There's no stories. It's just the lore.
Oh, right, right.
So it's all the, it's what fills the wikis,
right.
Whenever you go to...
It's what you need to build a D&D campaign.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, and, I would argue you don't really need that, right? I mean...
Yeah, that's true, yeah. Well, yeah, you can make it up on the fly. That's a good point, yeah.
Good story. I mean, one of the things I read once was like that every time you added something to your world, you needed to create a secret to go along with it. So that there was something for them to uncover.
Yeah.
But you don't want to create, if you create too much and too many secrets, then it's just constantly revealing secrets and it becomes overwhelming for the players. So it's the same sort of balance.
Yeah, we talk about this constantly, and need to keep our eyes on that ball too. And don't get me wrong, though I love lore, it's not, for me at least, it's not the starting point, especially for games, right? Like there's the core game needs to be the focus, and I just really, again, maybe giving too many kudos to them for kind of sticking with their lore in this game, but I just, seeing these characters and just for me personally, like resonating with these characters, but you spend so little time with them in the game that, they have this core game here, and then they just kind of bring these characters back in obviously in the movie they're main characters, but they're not like overdone throughout the rest of the games that touch upon them. They're just these touch points that I feel like they did a great job with kind of their discipline about how to utilize them, and it's just enough. So if you were to, like we're doing, go back and play these games, and Garona's in here, they don't over describe what's going on with her or Medivh, but it's just the seeds planted, and then they just go from there,
Right. Yeah, and, I don't know what was going on in their heads. I mean, I think probably it was mostly utilitarian. I mean, it feels like the levels were built and the story was added later. Like,
for sure.
Can't imagine, I mean, I can't imagine you would do it in any other way with a game like this. This particular game. First in a series, you don't even know if there's going to be a second one.
Yeah.
Story was at the time, famously as necessary to games as it was to porn, right? As Carmack put it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Jeez. I mean that's what he said about.
I know that's what he said. But,
same year, I think, right? No, it was a couple of years later, but it was around the same time. So it's a lot of stuff back then. I mean, you go and look at, like I've said a few times, like those early Ultimas, like sometimes they're okay. Some of them are really bad. You're just like, what? this is Garrett's Juvenalia game. I mean, where you're just like, what are you doing?
Well, and a lot of the Warcraft stuff, bleeds into that area as well, for sure. On the Medivh side, really quickly, he such a funny. So there's the mission that you kill him is funny because they retcon through all of that. Oh, I believe maybe I have things out of order here. Maybe this is actually his official death. But anyway, I don't know if you noticed, but they announced the new Hearthstone expansion, which is called...
No, I didn't.
Yeah, right. Of course you didn't. Anyway, for me, that's exciting news. But it's called One Night in Karazhan, and Karazhan is actually his keep, Medivh's keep. And it's a haunted keep, and then Legion is coming out, which is the new expansion for WoW. And the genesis of the whole, meta story with the demons from the Burning Legion invading Azeroth and all of that stuff that's basically fuels a lot of the crux of the Warcraft universe is all kind of through Medivh. Because he ends up, they call him a mad mage or whatever in this game, and it turns out he's been possessed by one of the demon lords. And that's why he's mad, and so that's uncovered, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the whole entry point of how the orcs get onto Azeroth as the world, and how the demons. So it all kind of unravels from there. But it's just, and of course that's why the demons are in this level. And of course, they didn't have any of this planned out, I'm sure, ahead of time, right? This is all retconning through. And your Boba Fett example, I think, is really, for probably most listeners, especially people who can care less about Warcraft lore, the Boba Fett one is like the ultimate example of all of this, right? It's like, oh, we have this false sense of security that this Boba Fett needs to be this character that lives on, and we need to add all of this extra stuff to. So let's put him in as a child into the prequels, and his dad is the Genesis clone for the first clone of the whole clone army. It's like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, that's absurd.
It's just overwrought. I couldn't believe it when they were telling us that was going to be what's happening. So you can take it too far. And I think Medivh is right on the cusp, though they do have a lot of fun with him. Karazhan is also a 10-man raid in WoW, which is one of the better ones in my opinion. So anyway, that's my little diversion into ridiculous Warcraft lore,
into the ridiculous world of Warcraft.
It's just so, I just feel ridiculous when I'm playing the mission in this last session, and it's like, oh, we're gonna go get Medivh, and look, there he is, and it's just like this sprite with 64 pixels or whatever, and it's like, how and why am I so free and excited about that? It's ridiculous. Yeah, what life am I leading?
It's pretty ridiculous. It's okay. It's okay.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we're at the end.
Yeah, we are.
I think that about covers everything. None of the lore stuff. You said Garona, and I was like, yeah, no idea. And Medivh, certainly. I do remember the name Khadgar, which is his apprentice or whatever.
Yeah, and he's a big deal in WoW right now too. Yeah. In fact, he's also a hero in Hearthstone.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's why the name's familiar. Yeah. I don't remember that. I played all my hands. I played as whatever you get first.
Both of those are extras that you have to get through. Yeah.
Through hours and hours and hours,
like the one
and hours.
No, actually, Medivh, you have to. I can't believe we're talking about this, but yeah, Medivh, you have to spend real money to get. I don't remember how much he was, but I did buy him. And,
of course you did.
Khadgar was actually cool. It was an Earth Day thing. So if you if you bought him, your proceeds would go to, I think it was Earth Day, or maybe it was, it was a charity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I can get behind that.
Mm-hmm.
For the next time, we're going to finish this game.
Yes, we are going to, speaking of more lore stuff, Blackhand, who is a big figure in the last WoW expansion, and etc. And then, of course, you ended Stormwind Keep, spoiler, on the orc side, and then on the human side, you ended Blackrock Spire, which, of course, is where so many things happen in World of Warcraft, right? Molten Core.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
It's all Blackrock Spire, Upper Blackrock. Like all of the really famous dungeons are in Blackrock Spire.
Yep, that's true. And I have done a bunch of that stuff. So, although it has been years, but I have done it. That's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. So that is something to look forward to. So we will do, like we said last time. If you don't feel like you want to play both sides, I mean, there are different things in each. They're not grossly different, though.
I was surprised this time that they did. Yeah,
they were more so this time, I think, than others. But fundamentally, it was still okay. Well, now we're in a dungeon area. You get the person out versus killing them. Minor difference, really. I mean, it's kill everything except for this one thing, or kill everything.
I did appreciate the level design differences between those two dungeon missions, and the mission design was there was enough differences there.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, the levels themselves I think are very, very different. But the actual goals and how they play out is often fairly similar between the two. So it's up to you. If you're into the Warcraft lore or all that stuff, definitely play both. If you're strapped for time but still want to play along, try at least to get to the last three of one of them. But we'll do Human 10, Orc 10, Human 11, Orc 11, Human 12, Orc 12, as we've been alternating prior. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville, and he is...
Tim Longo Jr.
And we are at Dev Game Club. Thanks for those of you who stopped by and say hello. You can drop us a line at devgameclub@gmail.com, and you can find us on the web at www.devgameclub.com, where I put up copious notes for each episode.
You do.
That lay out everything we talk about and all the references we make. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. So good night.
Good night.